If you want to practice all of the new PTE questions using artificial intelligence on an online portal that has a similar marking to your real PTE exam, head over to masterpte.com.au to create a free account. Here, you can practice all 4 sections separately and receive instant feedback for all of your speaking, writing, reading, and listening. You can also view and compare your answers with others who have already succeeded in achieving a high score. Download 9090 Band's template for speaking, writing, and listening. Take mock test, receive instant result, overall feedback, and in-depth analysis which helps you pinpoint exactly where you lose points. masterpte.com.au, the best PTE practice software in the world.
One of the most surprising insights from Einstein is that time is not what we intuitively think it is, right? Most of us have this sense that time for you is the same as time for me. In some sense, there's this cosmic clock that's out there ticking second after second after second, dragging us all in exactly the same way into the future. Einstein found that if you and I are moving relative to each other, however, our clocks don't tick off time at the same rate. Our watches, if they were once in sync, if we're moving relative to each other, they fall out of synchronization. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that what I consider to be happening right now at a given moment, from your perspective, that might be the past, or it might be the future. What you consider to be happening right now, to me, that may be the past or the future. Now, since your view of reality is every bit as valid as my view of reality, that means you can't really say the past is gone, because that might be your now, your reality. You can't really say the future's yet to be. It may be the future to me. It might be your now, your reality at that given moment. So in a sense, past, present, and future are all equally real. They all exist. They're all out there.
There was a time when the subject of happiness was the business of philosophers, as part of their discussion of what makes for the good life. Then, much later, psychologists and sociologists got in on the act, and now, it seems, so has the government. I understand that governments should have the welfare and well-being of those it governs at heart, from the purely practical point of view of keeping people quiet, at home enjoying their gadgets and comfort, rather than on the streets rioting. But surely it's not something you can legislate for. Today, there are numerous journals on the topic, and it is even included in the curriculum at some universities and colleges. Surveys are done, statistics compiled, graphs drawn, yet all they seem to prove is what most people have concluded themselves from personal experience. An obvious example would be that having a lot of money doesn't necessarily make you happy. We all wish to be happy and have ideas about what it is we think would make us so. But we also know or suspect that it's not that easy. Most of us learn that it is a byproduct of something else, usually being totally absorbed or involved in some task or pastime, and can only be reached that way. These activities, of course, must be worthwhile in themselves.
It is almost impossible these days not to include photography in a course on the history of art. I disagree with people such as Walter Benjamin, who suggest that technology and art don't go well together. Photography, with its realism, its accurate representation of the thing in front of you, initially deprived many artists of their subject matter, forcing them to look in new ways. No bad thing. True, mass-produced images of, say, the Mona Lisa obviously can't provide the same experience as seeing the real painting. On the other hand, there are photographs which, to my mind, are far more thought-provoking and have greater emotional impact than a painting of the same subject ever could. Some people say that the traditional idea of an artist with a trained hand and eye is old-fashioned. They no longer believe that an artist needs specialist knowledge, but rather that he or she can simply point a camera at a scene and record it. However, on the one hand, that ignores the creative skill involved in producing photographs. On the other hand, it also ignores the fact that even in the past, painters used various technological aids. For example, the Dutch painter Vermeer used a camera obscura to help him create his images. We'll go into that later, but for now, I want to look at the documentary and cultural value of photography.
Now, you might think it's strange that in a lecture on biology, I'll be talking a lot about mathematics. If I may digress a bit, when I was a student, mathematics, the language of clear abstraction, had nothing to do with life sciences like biology, the sphere of messy organic forms, cutting up frogs in the lab and so on. In fact, I started doing biology precisely to avoid maths and physics, so I've had a lot of catching up to do. We are all aware of how the sciences have come to interrelate more and more, and not only will mathematics impinge more and more on biology, but also, I am told, in the 21st century, the driving force behind mathematics will be biology. This is partly because mathematicians are always on the lookout for more areas to conquer. But a far greater reason is that the subject has been boiled down to physics and chemistry, obvious attractions for mathematicians. A number of mathematical fields can be applied to biology. For example, knot theory is used in the analysis of the tangled strands of DNA, and abstract geometry in 4 or more dimensions is used to tell us about viruses. Again, neuroscience appears to be maths-friendly, and equations can also explain why hallucinogenic drugs cause the users to see spirals. So, if mathematicians are taking such a keen interest in biology, the least we can do as biologists is return the compliment.
So today we're continuing to talk about the social history of foodstuffs, and we're going on to consider next the importance of salt and the significant role it has played. Salt was a highly valued commodity in ancient times, not because it made food taste nicer, but because of the way it could be used to preserve food. This meant that people were not so dependent on seasonal variations in what was available for them to eat. They could preserve what they produced and consume it as required. It also meant that food could be transported long distances. Salt was not easy to obtain, and so prices for it were high. It was often necessary to transport it long distances, and it is believed that one of the reasons for building some of the roads that led to the ancient city of Rome was to make it easier to bring salt to the city from various parts of the Roman Empire. Roman rulers took financial advantage of the population's need for salt. When they wanted to raise money for some war or another, they raised the price of salt. Elsewhere, salt was important too. In Africa, for example, caravans consisting of up to 40,000 camels are said to have traveled 400 miles across the Sahara to transport salt to the inland markets of places like Timbuktu.
Quantum foam is an idea that emerges from the application of quantum physics to the fabric of space and time itself. You see, Einstein taught us in general relativity that space and time are not an inert backdrop. They participate in the unfolding of the cosmos. Space and time can warp and curve, and that creates the force of gravity. When you recognize that space and time are dynamic, they can change, that they're real physical entities, well, then they must be subject to the laws of quantum physics. And the key element of quantum physics that's relevant is the uncertainty principle. When applied to space and time, it says space and time are uncertain, which means they can wildly fluctuate. They can, in a sense, look like the violently boiling surface of a pot of water when you examine space and time on fantastically small scales. So the idea is if you examine space on smaller and smaller scales, not everyday scales, but tiny scales, the uncertainty gets bigger and bigger, and space and time become foam-like. They look bubbly. They look frenetic, undulating. And that's quantum foam down at the ultra-microscopic scale that we've been struggling to deal with for decades, because the math of Einstein doesn't work down there, the math of quantum mechanics and the math of Einstein lock horns, and we've been trying to resolve that conflict, in essence, to understand what truly is going on with the quantum foam.
What matters is how much does each person in a household get? How much income is supporting each person in a household? Look what happens when we take that 18% figure. And again, the figure I'll remind you is from 1976 until 2006, in inflation-adjusted terms, the income of the median household income in America rose only by 18%. But at the same time, the size of the household has fallen. So what's happened to the average income per person in the household? Per household person income, if you look at the income per each individual in the household over that 30-year period, we see that that rose not by 18%, but by 32%. Because the number of people in a household has fallen, the amount of income earned by the household goes further per person, because you have fewer people to share the income. Each person gets a larger slice of the pie because you have fewer people sharing the pie. So just making that one adjustment, looking at what's happened to the size of households, causes that 18% figure to rise to 32%. 32% is still not great over a 30-year period, but it's different than 18%. It's a little bit more optimistic. And if nothing else, it should give you some sense that data have to be interpreted carefully.
To be a British, the first important thing is the free of speech that we have. It doesn't matter how small you are, how big you are able to shout. I think security is very important. It's a society that has democracy as its basic value. There are people who come from a third world which wasn't a British colony where they didn't have democracy such way they grew up under what I called a law lord. A system where the king or the local headman was the ruler of that particular area and he laid down the laws. And there are still parts of Africa as well as Middle East where the system still exists. They have to follow that ritual and that's it, they cannot argue against it. Well, in our British society, we can argue. As the American saying, we can fight the city hall, and this is one thing which is very unique among the Western civilization. Is that any voice is heard, however small as, however big as, we have the equal authority. Happiness comes from the frequency and quality of social relationships. The higher the frequency, the more happiness relations with friends and family and others produce. It is not sure why social relation is correlated with happiness. But there's evidence that when people feel more satisfied with their social relations, they will feel happier. In turn, when people feel happier, they will get more satisfied with social relations. Happy people tend to be social more with friends and have more interaction between family. Some people wonder if their social activities make them happier or their happy personalities drive them to be social more with their friends and families. Clouds are formed from tiny droplets of water and ice. The air all around you has water vapor in it. Water vapor is the gaseous form of water. You can't see water vapor, but it exists where the air is warm. Air near the ground is usually warm because as the ground is heated by the sun, the ground in turn heats the surrounding air. When warm air rises, it becomes colder, and as it cools, water that was once vapor condenses into droplets. Have you ever noticed clouds near the tops of mountains? Those clouds form as air rises along the mountain and water vapor condenses.
want to practice all of the new PTE questions using artificial intelligence on an online portal that has a similar marking to your real PTE exam, head over to masterpte.com.au to create a free account. Here, you can practice all 4 sections separately and receive instant feedback for all of your speaking, writing, reading, and listening. You can also view and compare your answers with others who have already succeeded in achieving a high score. Download 9090 Band's template for speaking, writing, and listening. Take mock test, receive instant result, overall feedback, and in-depth analysis which helps you pinpoint exactly where you lose points. Masterpte.com.au, the best PTE practice software in the world.